Welcome to this ISO QSL webinar on the topic of interested parties. This is me, Julia Meaden. I have over 20 years experience of working in quality, business coaching, training and assessing, and I'm a senior lead assessor for ISO QSL. Objectives of the webinar to develop an understanding of interested parties in the context of the ISO standards, to provide a methodology for helping you to identify the relevant interested parties, and to pose some questions for you to consider. We'd also like to encourage you to think about how to take forward these ideas and adapt them for your business, our usual call to action. So, this term interested parties, what does it mean? There's a definition provided by the ISO 9001 standard. The definition is a person or organisation that can affect, be affected by, or perceive itself to be affected by a decision or activity. As you can see, it's a fairly broad definition, and in some of the standards within the ISO suite, there is an additional definition that makes it more specific to that particular standard. But this is a generic definition as provided by the standard for this term interested parties. Interested parties is part of clause 4 of the standard when we're interested in looking at the context of the organisation. So as you can see, 4.2 within the standard 9001, understanding the needs and expectations of interested parties. And the standard requires us to determine the interested parties that are relevant to the quality management system and the requirements of those interested parties. And additionally, the business needs to monitor and review that information about those interested parties and their requirements to make sure that we're up to date and that all the information we hold and our understanding is current. So, some questions for you to consider. Have you identified the interested parties for your business? If so, are they documented? One of the benefits, of course, of documenting them is that you can more easily review them, because the standard actually requires you to review the information that you hold to make sure that it's still current and to make sure that your understanding remains up to date. So, breaking down the requirements of ISO 9001, there are 3 elements: identify the relevant interested parties, identify their requirements, and then monitor and review on an ongoing basis. Why would you do this over and above the requirements of the standards? It's actually good business practice to identify, understand and review your interested parties, because it provides you with some important information that could perhaps inform your business planning process. In fact, many businesses who look at the requirements of interested parties do this as part of a broader business planning process. And in reviewing those requirements, it actually gives you a heads up if their expectations or requirements change. So it means that you can factor that into your planning to make sure that you continue to understand and meet the expectations and requirements of these interested parties. So actually it makes a lot of good business sense. So how might you do this? As I've already said, it might be a part of your business planning process. This may be something you do already. If you don't do it already, there are some really good ways of doing this. For example, you could ask team members to come up with a list and then review that list and incorporate that into one generic overall list for the business. There's a process called stakeholder mapping, which, as it suggests, we identify our stakeholders. Stakeholders as a terminology, I think, is probably fairly widely used, and we're using stakeholder and interested parties interchangeably within this webinar. The terminology that you use almost doesn't matter really, but the stakeholders and the interested parties are the ones that we want to identify and understand. So you could use stakeholder mapping, or you could conduct a stakeholder analysis. So a stakeholder, someone that has a stake in our business. So very, very similar definition, and perhaps a slightly more straightforward one than the definition of interested parties. So stakeholder mapping, I mentioned to you, it's a fairly straightforward activity. There's you yourselves in the middle, so the company, the business is in the middle, and then you look at who are those stakeholders or interested parties that have some kind of an interest within your business, and you can see there are examples there, and these ones will be fairly common, fairly generic. Other examples of interested parties or stakeholders, if you prefer: your employees, so the team themselves have a stake in the business; your customers, owners and shareholders if you have them, directors of the company; your sector or any professional bodies that you may be involved in; your suppliers and your providers; and legislative and compliance bodies are also examples of interested parties or stakeholders. So in order to understand, you could conduct a stakeholder analysis, which is simply taking the mapping that we looked at earlier to a next level. And you could use, for example, a simple matrix that lists those stakeholders and their requirements on one document. So again, that could be a useful tool for the business as part of business planning, as well as providing sound evidence for meeting the requirements of the standard. And here's an example of a matrix. So very straightforward. On the left hand side we list those interested parties that we identified earlier, and we put a broad summary of their requirements. And again, often their requirements will be generic. From the perspective of the ISO standard, the next step is to identify those stakeholders or interested parties that are relevant to the quality management system. Legislative and compliance bodies provide a good example of this, because in order to achieve the standard and in order to run an effective quality management system, one of the things that you are required to understand is the legislative and compliance requirements of the organisations that are related to your business and the kind of business that you operate. Reviewing interested parties is also important, and this should be done periodically, for example as part of business planning. So the standard does not set down how often you should review, but do it periodically, and often this is done as something within the annual business planning cycle, so perhaps once a year. And once you've identified the interested parties or stakeholders, of course reviewing it and keeping it up to date takes much less time. But thinking about your interested parties, who are they and what are their requirements, is of course the key question. And you might already do this for some parties, for example your staff and your customers. You may do that as part of a survey that you conduct, a staff survey or a customer survey. And as always, our advice is keep it simple, don't overcomplicate it. In summary, over and above the requirements of the ISO standards, it is good practice to identify, understand and review the expectations of your interested parties or stakeholders. Please do use existing data, don't reinvent the wheel. And actually good practice makes this a part of an overall business planning process. And most importantly, don't overcomplicate, don't make it too timely so that actually it's something that we mean to do but we never get round to it. Keep it simple. So how can ISO QSL help you? We can help you in a number of ways. For example, we can provide access to a free ISO 9001 introduction module for your team. We can provide physical quality management training at your premises or at ours, and we're very happy to offer you a client preferential rate for that. And we can also offer one-to-one coaching to assist you with embedding in your quality systems and the kind of procedures that you work with. So lots of ways that we can help you. If you are interested in the free webinar, then please do contact us. And actually we also have more on interested parties. There is a webinar, the concepts of the ISO 9001, that you can purchase, and actually that will cover off some of the things that we've talked about and say a little more about this topic of interested parties. So if you're interested more about the context, clause 4 of the standard, please do consider using this module as part of your training and development. If you have any questions at all, we'd be very happy to hear from you. You can contact us via email, Twitter, or you can have a look at our website. And when you go to the website, there'll be more information about that free webinar on ISO 9001 standard. Thank you very much, and good luck with taking this forward.